Okay, so now we are officially recording. Just so you know, this will be shared also with other people. Normally, if I record workshops, I share only with the group, but with webinars, I'm a little bit more open, which is one of the reasons why we're not sharing so much within the group. So yeah, you will be famous. Thanks for that idea. So one more time, welcome everybody. We're really focusing on trainers world. We are touching on different positive psychology topics, tools, ideas, but really focused on people with some background or interests in training and coaching. We'll be mixing these two a little bit. I hope we can go with that, but you're also very welcome at any point to ask more about how can we apply something if you feel like it's not totally clear. So we're gonna go roughly around an hour, maybe 5-10 minutes longer, because I was a bit ambitious with squishing a lot in. So plan for that, or feel free to drop off when you need to, and I'll send you the recording anyway. So before we hit it off, as webinars we do, they're not really interactive. As I said, it's a lot of me talking and sharing bits and information. I would like to still invite you, if you haven't, to just share in chat something about yourself, so you kind of check in some way. It could be your name and definitely what brought you to this webinar or what's your interest in the topic. I'm not reading them out loud anymore, but I'm keeping an eye. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, questions on the way as well, or expectations straight from the beginning, please feel free to share. So let me share with you what the plan is, so you know immediately which parts of it are less or more interesting for you. So I'll stay just short at the beginning with giving a bit of context to this webinar. Why are we bringing these two things together? Probably I'll say something about myself as well, although I didn't plan it and add it to the slide, but I guess I just realized that would be a good idea as well. I'll give you a little bit of context of why am I doing it, what is the kind of purpose behind, how does it fit in sort of broader picture of both training and positive psychology. And then we're gonna dive straight into the topic of positive psychology for trainers, which we will tackle in a way that I'll throw in 7 different bits or perspectives or principles or something of a kind, not really tools, but more closer to principles from positive psychology. And I will address each of them from perspective, okay, what does that mean for us as trainers? What is something that positive psychology says or realizes or teaches or whatever, and how can we take that as trainers? Why is it useful for us? In that sense, it's going to be very diverse. I'm really planning it in a way that's kind of more like throwing a lot of ideas out there and letting you run with them and take the ones you like and develop them. So we're not going to be developing them very deep. We'll stay with each topic 5, maximum 10 minutes, depends on the topic. And the purpose is really just to give you set of ideas, set of insights, and maybe ideas of where you want, what do you want to explore next, or what might be interesting for you. So first topic will be positive psychology, just a little bit about what is it, what is the main kind of, let's say, viewpoint behind positive psychology, and how does it relate to us as trainers as well? What can we learn out of it? And talk a little on well-being and what is in that concept for trainers, which is one of main focus points of positive psychology. Also sharing one model that can be quite nicely leveraged by us as trainers in different contexts. Well, both in coaching and in working with organizations, it's quite an interesting model. Then we're going to tackle a little bit positive emotions, just from perspective of some interesting insights that positive psychology gives us on positive emotions, and what do they mean for us as trainers? How can we take it? How can we use it for our participants or clients in case of coaches? Then the bit that's probably the shortest, we'll be touching on evidence-based toolboxes. One of the biggest value that positive psychology is really bringing into training or coaching is this science-based, evidence-based, research-based background. I won't be going deep into that, but I do want us to take it as a value point in a way. So with evidence-based practices, I just want to make you more aware of some of the main topics, but I won't go deep into it because that's the area that's really about tools. And that's the topic of the webinar on 10th of March. So I kind of split them into, today we are more with positive psychology in general, with some main ideas and principles. And then next time we're really digging into more practical tools in a way. That's around halfway through. Then we're going to talk a little bit about strengths-based approach, one of the most interesting, especially in work with organizations and with leaders, one of the most interesting aspects of positive psychology. So that one we're going to stay a little bit longer with than most of others. And then two very short, interesting concepts, one of which is called hedonic adaptation. And again, what does it mean for us as trainers? And one that is called dynamic spread of happiness, or the concept of happiness being a bit viral and contagious in a certain way. And what does that mean for us as trainers? So while we're tackling 7 topics, some of them we're touching very briefly, with some we're staying a tiny bit longer. And then at the end, which I said will be around an hour, maybe tiny bit longer, hour and 5 or 10 minutes, I'll just invite you for quick reflection on the things that we touched on, maybe taking away some conclusions, and action points. And in the very end, whoever has some question and answers, you're very welcome to stay. We won't have formal questions and answers part, but I'm available after. So if somebody has anything interesting, you can stay. And in the meantime, throughout the webinar, you can shoot the questions in the chat. That will be very welcome. So hello, everyone, one more time who checked in the chat. Thank you for that. Hi, Nives. Hi, Denisa, and Leonidas, and everyone before. Good to see you. Good to have you here. So first of all, what I told you about the context of this webinar. Context of this webinar was that it's one of the initiatives that I'm doing as part of my kind of umbrella initiative called Trainers Toolbox, which is really a place that aims to enrich trainers with new tools, preferably with evidence-based tools or with very kind of, let's say, empirically experienced tools that I know from my own experience or close other trainers' experience, that they're really valuable tools. So the idea of Trainers Toolbox is really this kind of focus on education of trainers and kind of, let's say, a little bit adding new value in terms of new tools to the field of training, especially on the side of no bullshit evidence-based thing. So while we are on the side of Trainers Toolbox, which is an initiative that started as a blog a few years ago, but today is also a lot of workshops behind it. Today's webinar, although it's officially something started from Trainers Toolbox, it's also something that's merging very much with another field from which many of you know me, which is Happiness Academy and Positive Psychology Training. So usually these both topics are my big 2 focus points within training, 2 main areas where I work under these 2 distinct brands. And it's just really confusing for me today to be in a webinar which merges both together and really kind of take the content from Happiness Academy and then apply it to a Trainers Toolbox world. With having that said, I would also invite you, if you're aware of only one of these, or you're following more on one of these, to also keep an eye on the second one. Happiness Academy is really focused on positive psychology and tools and content from positive psychology, and Trainers Toolbox on trainers and coaches as well in terms of skills, tools, and so on. So today we're kind of bringing these 2 fields together with this dream that we can take more valuable evidence-based practices into training. And the last thing on the context of it, I also wanted to share with you, just to understand where I'm coming from. I think you all know me, but if somebody doesn't, my name is Mirna. I'm a trainer for 11 years now and a coach, and I was playing with a lot of different topics. Today, my main focus are Happiness Academy and Trainers Toolbox. So I also have a background as an engineer and traveler, definitely. So I wanted to share still with you a little bit what are other topics that are my main focus throughout this year, because I think that maybe will give you also a bit more understanding on my perspective in this webinar. So why am I looking at things that way? And what are the sides where I have more experience and you can ask about it, and what are maybe the ones where I don't. So we keep it practical and yeah, applied in some way. So within both of these brands, within both of these topics, trainings and positive psychology, I'm working in 3 areas. One are webinars and talks. Webinars are basically something like this weird thing where I talk a lot for an hour and throw in a lot of information and ideas at you. Talks are kind of similar because they're usually for very big audiences. I usually make them a little bit interactive, but quite low in interaction and really focused on content, because purpose of them is to spread these ideas to bigger audience, let's say, to more people, and to just kind of get tip of ideas and get people a little bit motivated to dig in deeper into them. Then the main thing that I do is our workshops with experiential learning, so much more practice-based, much more exercises-based and experience-based, a little bit longer in much smaller group, much more private. So if we record it, we don't share it with anyone out of that group. That's really in the core of what I do and what I believe is most valuable way of learning. A lot of practices I'll be sharing are with this in mind. And then in the end, I love hosting meetups, mainly from positive psychology, also for trainers, with just meaningful discussions on different kind of more facilitated, not content-based, just meaningful discussions. So within Trainers Toolbox, the specific topics that are kind of actual for me these days, so probably a lot of these things will go in a little bit of those directions. It's delivering Train the Trainers, one of my main focuses in the last half a year. Then now starting off a series of workshops, online workshops, Positive Psychology Toolbox for trainers and coaches. This is really in depth of the topic we are covering today. And then just doing a lot of different webinars. And then in the second half of the year, I'll be focusing a lot on virtual training and best practices in virtual training and different tools we can leverage, especially for experiential learning in virtual training. So if you're curious on some of these topics, keep an eye on Trainers Toolbox. I'll be sharing a lot, covering them one by one. And then on Happiness Academy, the main focus at the moment is redelivering our 12-Step to Happiness. It's sort of a virtual course in 12 modules. That's very engaging, that's really experiential and made sort of as a journey, exploring different topics of positive psychology. Not at all from the eyes of trainer, but very engaging and much more exploring our own reality and life and so on. Also one of my favorite courses to deliver. On Happiness Academy, I'm also planning, apart from live design workshops, which I do every couple of months, different webinars on diverse positive psychology topics, which will be running throughout the year. So if you're curious on that, also keep an eye on Happiness Academy, especially on the newsletter, and some of the maybe most present topics throughout this year will be topic of resilience and topic of happiness at work. So these are some of the, so I wanted to share this straight at the beginning because I wanted to give you a bit broader context. Where does this webinar fit in everything else I'm doing? How is it connected with different sites? So I'm going to leave that context and the bigger picture aside now, and we can kick it off straight into the topic. So I'm keeping an eye on chat. So if at any point something is not clear, I would invite you to write in chat any questions or anything. I'll always keep an eye on it and I'll always be replying it or adding on to that topic. So our first topic today, from 7 of them, is what is positive psychology? I think many of you already came across the term, and I threw in one very nerdy definition, basically saying positive psychology is the scientific study of the strengths that enables individuals and communities to thrive. The field is founded, let me just move. Very loud, okay, sorry for that. So the field is founded on the belief that people want to cultivate what is the best with himself and to enhance their experience of love, work, and play. This is a definition from University of Pennsylvania, the place where one of the kind of the father figure of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, is running his positive psychology programs, and where in a way field was started. So it has these 2 aspects when we talk about positive psychology. And again, I'm looking at it right now very much from the eyes of a trainer, so very much the meta eyes in a way. On one side, it is the science. It is something that where we very much are trying to add on scientific method behind tools and presuppositions and ideas that the field is bringing in. And on the other side, there is this strong set of beliefs that is coming from humanistic psychology that kind of says people are good in their essence and they want to lead meaningful life and they're keen on self-development. So if we really drill down positive psychology to 2 core principles, 2 core things in foundation of it, it's these 2 things. People want to have meaningful lives and want to use their potential, and let's look into that in scientific way. Let's look into how we can achieve that. Do we really want that? How do we know we want it? Let's look at it through the eyes of scientific method. So now the question is, and please also feel free to share your thoughts in chat. What does that mean? What is the implication? By the way, chat will not be shared with the recording, I believe. I have to check, but it shouldn't be. So if you want to share something there, it should not go out of this call. So what is that implication that we can take away from this into the training, from based on the definition that I just shared? Sorry, I'm just answering a quick question in chat. So in my mind, the implication for training is related to both of these a little bit. On one side, it's the same attitude that we have as trainers, that people are, want to use their potential and that they want to use their, highest achieve meaningful life and so on. But at the same time, this other aspect of scientific method and proven tools, in my mind, that's something I would like to see much more in the field of training, in the field of coaching, checking more what is behind different tools and leveraging more of those that actually have something tangible behind. So when we look into positive psychology, we can drill it on 3 different levels in terms of kind of big picture versus specifics, 3 different perspectives that we can pick up from it and use as a trainers. One of them is really just the principles of positive psychology. So main principles are the ones that I kind of mentioned already. People wish to be well in some way, to live a good life, to use their potential. And the other of the main principles is that we can achieve that by looking for what is right, for what we are doing already, for how are people who are using their full potential and living a meaningful life, how are they doing it? And basically that by focusing on successful aspects and successful examples and researching on those examples, that's how we can learn and grow that positive aspect of things, which you can argue it's a little bit optimistic, and it is something that we're going to also touch later in strength-based approach. How do we actually apply that? How do we actually use that? So one of the aspects where we can take something from positive psychology and use it in our training as trainers or as coaches is just these principles. The idea that I can focus on what is good and look for that and leverage that and strengthen that instead of fixing problems. Hi, can you hear me? I think my connection was playing games with us. Give me just a second to reshare again. Okay, cool. Thank you. Sorry for that. If it happens again, I will reconnect to another, in another way. Let me just reshare. Sorry for that. It usually doesn't happen, so it caught me quite by surprise. So I was saying that within. Let me just open the chat again as well to see if there are any comments or questions. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Okay, I have you all back now. So I was saying that within positive psychology, there are 3 different levels which we can leverage in trainers. One of them is principles of positive psychology. I hope you caught that one. That one I kind of covered already. The second one is research from positive psychology. So just this rich body of knowledge related to what is meaningful in human well-being, in flourishing, in resilience, in performance, in flow, what are the components of all of these different things, different ways of understanding them through scientific method. So in that sense, I would definitely recommend, if you're curious in some of these topics, to also read more about it, because there is, under each of them, there is a lot of just evidence-based knowledge that we can relate or use. And then the third side that we have, which is will be our topic mainly in the next call, is related to these tools or interventions. So different, in positive psychology, we call them interventions. I usually call them tools because it's more self-explanatory. That's different tools that are really based on those findings from research, but are designed with positive psychology practitioners in mind. Positive psychology practitioner is anyone, that would include trainers and coaches, who is trying to implement positive psychology principles in practice. So somebody who works with positive psychology in organizations, or in education, or in therapy, or in training, coaching, or anything else. So if you, that's also a hint, I'll also mention it later. If you're looking for new tools from positive psychology, the key word would be the topic you're looking for, or subtopic like resilience or whatever, and then interventions. That would be the let's say, wording in there. So today, main part of our call will be focused between principles and research, kind of covering different aspects from these two, some knowledge, some principles and ways of thinking within positive psychology. And then the webinar on 10th of March will be a little bit more kind of specific and drill into specific tools that we can use and leverage. So while we speak about principles from positive psychology that we can leverage, I think the main one, the one I mentioned already in a way, is really this one: can things become better by me focusing on their positive aspects? That specifically in this metaphor from the picture would mean, is it for a plant more important thing that I water it and give it sunshine, or is it that I remove the weeds? And then the approach of positive psychology, it's kind of down the line that what we want to focus on is, what are we feeding? What are we growing? How can we provide more sunshine and light and water to different aspects of our lives we want to grow, different positive aspects, obviously. And then with the thought that then we will not have to deal with the weeds so much, because positive aspects will be strong enough that they can kind of hold on their own and not necessarily be bothered by weeds. Obviously, this is situational, and obviously it's not intention of positive psychology to neglect the weeds or deny that they exist or not deal with problems. It's just this principle that in general, we want to strive more for focusing on the positive. And again, without denying anything. And one of the reasons that's behind that, it's quite evidence-based and it's quite science-based, and it's related to this thing from the picture. And this thing basically says, if we have a ton of beautiful things in our life and we have one bad thing, we have a human tendency to get stuck with the bad thing. And that's something that we call negativity bias. It's simple evolutionary mechanism of our brain to give more priority to anything negative that shows up around us comparing to positive. It's evolutionary developed because it was important defense from, you know, just survival threats. Today, problem as well, although not as big. But today is a problem for us, mainly because we have a lot of stimuli today. And that includes a lot of negative stimuli, just, bad Facebook comments or emails or traffic or a lot of little things going on in our life that in theory are negative, although not significant. And we are very prone to give them too much weight or too much focus. And this is what we're trying to fight with this principle of positive psychology, to focus more on positive and focus more on light and water and sunshine. So we are not trying to say negative doesn't matter. Instead, we are assuming that we as humans, because we know that from negativity bias, are more inclined to focus on negative. So we want to balance that with leveraging positive a little bit more than we naturally would. That's kind of the mindset behind. And I know sometimes it can be a little bit controversial in the sense, are we overly positive or overly optimistic? So what implication does that have for trainers? What implication does negativity bias or this approach of positive psychology to focus on positive have, or how can we learn from it as a trainers? So one of them is in our training, or it could be coaching, directly. That means that in general, we should be quite focused, especially if that's not naturally our style, on this side of appraisal, appreciation, positive feedback. I know we kind of do it in a bit forced way sometimes in feedback sandwich methods and all these things. But in general, this also means that we do want to provide a little bit more encouragement and appreciation than we naturally think of. Not that it should be fake or overdone, but just to keep in mind that for us, it's natural to notice negatives more and to try to balance that a little bit more. And then the second side where we can leverage this is sharing this idea of negativity bias and the idea that we can balance it by focusing on positive a bit more, not because we want to be overly positive and perky, but because that's what we need for balanced view, to share that within contexts such as teamwork, such as managers who are not focused like that, such as different relationships, such as the ways we give feedback. So I think there is space for this finding in many of topics of training when we notice that something is a consequence of too much negativity, to give this a little bit more scientific view. Okay, this negativity is not because somebody is a bad person or because they have terrible habits of being negative, not at all. It's because it's our natural tendency. And the way to fight it is not to be against negativity, but instead to focus on building more appreciation, positivity, positive interactions, positive bits and pieces. So this would be, when we look into the field of positive psychology, this would probably be the highest level big picture we can think of. Just looking into, can we all focus a little bit more on positive bits and focus more on them? It's, as such, it's also probably most vague thing we are covering today and most abstract in a way. Apart from that, there are many other topics we have within positive psychology. So I wanted to share the main topics here. We will not be covering all of them. I just wanted to make you aware of what is there within the field that you might want to explore. So I will send you these slides. If you applied, you'll get the recording and the slides, so no need to make any notes or whatever, snapshots or whatever. But I will also run, and it will not stay long with overview, but I will just run fairly quickly through these topics of how can we, what are the different aspects of positive psychology we can leverage. So there is a lot going on in positive psychology related to coaching. There is even positive psychology coaching as a direction in coaching. Also related to positive organizations, meaningful ways of doing business, and positive education. I would say that's maybe three biggest area where positive psychology is being most implemented and leveraged in practice. But there are also many other fields. There is field of motivation, field of creativity, field of strengths and virtues. We're going to touch on them today. Connecting positive psychology with topics of emotional intelligence, combining just with concept of well-being, one of the main fields, which we'll talk about next in positive psychology. And then also psychology of time. How does our perception of time and focus on future, past, present, and similar impact our well-being and our sense of our life. And then the last maybe big area is this positive coping or resilience. One I said will be a big focus on Happiness Academy later this year. That's really about how do we cope with both good and difficult changes and how can we go through them better. So these are some of the main topics. I would invite you, if some of them are interesting for you and we're not covering them today, please feel free to shoot me an email and I'll be happy to share more links or books or anything of a kind if you want to dig into some of the other ones. So one of the main topics within positive psychology is really the topic of well-being. You can call it happiness. Well-being is a little bit more balanced, a little bit broader in a way, but this idea of well-being that we all strive for, to some level, comfortable, meaningful, joyful, positive life, and to some level of happiness. And with that, maybe the most interesting aspect of well-being is really how would you define it and how do we define happiness? I will share with you two different definitions related to, well, coming from positive psychology, how we can define happiness. But I would also invite you to think about your own definition. It's something that normally, if I'm doing intro to positive psychology, that's not the trainer focused, then I'll usually start with that, asking people to define what is well-being or happiness for them. If I would ever work with a client who would want to work on well-being or happiness or something of a kind, my first step would be to ask them, what does that mean for them? So I hope that from positive psychology, you can get some ideas on what are the aspects that ideally should be in the definition. So we also notice if our clients have some blind spots or participants have some blind spots, but also to always invite them to think of their own definition. So one of the simplest and most straightforward definition of happiness or well-being is coming from Martin Seligman, again, the father of positive psychology. And he defines it as just this, sorry, went to the wrong one. As just this good life, as it calls it. Freedom from suffering, to some level feeling flourishing, meaning using our own potential, well-being, joy, prosperity, and pleasure. So he kind of just put it all under the same hood, mentioned a couple of different aspects. He refers to it a lot as flourishing. Flourishing for him is kind of like using our potential in life. So very simple definition, and it could be an interesting one to take if you work with someone for whom the topic of well-being is interesting, to look into, okay, which aspect specifically is interesting for them. For that, I also share an interesting model with you that can be helpful. The second definition, a little bit different, is from Ed Diener, also one of the biggest names. And it says, subjective well-being, which is another word for happiness, is a combination of life satisfaction and having more positive emotions than negative emotions. This is probably the most present way of defining happiness within positive psychology, as this balance of having sort of a big picture of your life and having sort of presence of positive emotions that's a bit higher than your presence of negative emotions. So it doesn't mean negative shouldn't exist, but we have this idea that for us to feel like our life is happy, there should be more positive emotions than negative. And it really comes back to this balance between the two. So there are many other definitions. They're not all the same. Not everybody from positive psychology field would agree to the same definition. So back to that, if you're curious for more, Google it up a little bit or think of your own definition. However, if we want to take that into a little bit more practical domain from perspective of trainers, we can talk about one of the most famous models of well-being, which came from Seligman as well, which is called PERMA model. It's a model that we can leverage when working with organizations, basically in any context, when we want to work on the aspect of well-being. So happiness, but also a little bit resilience, but let's say happiness and well-being. And PERMA model says that this human flourishing, or the state where we feel we are living a happy life and fulfilling our potential, that is marked by 5 strong pillars or 5 strong areas that need to be satisfied and exist for us to feel like we flourish. And these areas would be, in order of PERMA, positive emotions. So first of all, for somebody to feel that they have satisfying, happy life, that life must be like rich in positive emotions. Again, doesn't mean negatives don't exist, but it means there is presence of positive ones. However, that's not even one, sense of engagement. And that simply means that we are engaged in activities that we are doing. That means that we are present in the things we are doing, that we are interested and motivated in the current activities. So to some level that we are engaged in kind of, not necessarily in a moment, but in general, in activities, in our day, in our job, in our whatever relationships, that we feel involved in some way. And then the third one is related to relationships. Fun fact, he added this one later because he was criticized for not having it. So now relationships are also a very meaningful part of happy and meaningful life. So, and we defined like positive relationships as the ones we are satisfied with. That is the main markings of how how much good are our relationships for our happiness, the main mark is our satisfaction with them. It has nothing to do with any other criteria, with any sort of like measurements or anything. It really comes down to our satisfaction. We can have very few relationships that can be very deep, or we can have broader circle. It's totally irrelevant. It all comes down to, are we satisfied with them, and with number and with level of our relationships. And then the fourth aspect of PERMA is meaning. So feeling that our life to some level is meaningful. That doesn't mean we have a huge cause we are fighting for and striving for. It just means we sense that something that we are doing is meaningful to some level, that we are finding some meaning in our everyday and some meaning in bigger picture of our life as well. And then the fifth aspect, A, stands for accomplishment, also added a little bit later. Than the initial positive emotions, engagement, and meaning. Accomplishment is really about this feeling that also we are managing to do things we want to do. So kind of achieving our goals, being fairly successful at things we are doing. This is not about very high standards of success. It's not about chasing crazy goals, but it is about feeling like what I'm doing well in what I'm doing. I'm capable of achieving my goals, and I'm progressing on my, let's say, goals, vision, and I have some sense of achievement and doing things successfully. And again, this one is very subjective. Each of them, except maybe positive emotions and engagement, there are less, but relationships, meaning, and accomplishment, they're down a lot to our perception of it. So I'm not going to go deeper in PERMA, although I would love to. It's a very interesting model and a lot to dig in each of the subtopics. Instead, I would want to invite you to think a little bit, how could this be used for us as trainers? What does that mean for us as trainers or coaches? How can I leverage that model in a meaningful way? For me, one of the best things is really to use it sort of as a checkpoint. When we are working with someone on well-being, which again can be individual or it can be organizational, like a team, how much there is engagement and satisfaction in a team or organization, really kind of just going through different aspects and discussing them, and in some way scoring them or measuring them, and discovering that way which is the aspect that requires us to focus on more. So it's really good initial point of conversation. Which aspect do we want to work on? If the topic is well-being, obviously. Another way that sometimes, this is a very cool idea in chat when designing learning activities, also taking this into consideration, definitely, or even just on the level of the session, not the activity. I think there could be easier to hit that balance. And we will be touching on some of them specifically on positive emotions in relation to training and when do we want them and why. So if PERMA is not really practical for you to use in some moment, I wanted to share with you one more very simple model which I like to use when I work with someone, or just also when I have bigger groups and asking for people to reflect on their own well-being and life. I like to invite them to think from these two aspects. Which, if you remember, I mentioned in definitions. So one of them is, how much do I feel happy in moment by moment? So how much do I feel happy that I live good moments, that I have nice memories, experiencing positive emotions on this very temporary picture of my life, in comparison to kind of how I think about my life. Does a big picture of my life make sense? Am I satisfied in some way with my life story? Does it have meaning? So just kind of differentiating between the two, very much moment and very much big picture. And the reason why I like to start off with that sometimes, because from my experience, that is something that is often the first thing to be unbalanced. It has to do with that psychology of time as well, but also with the fact it's very difficult to balance these two. Because for one, we need presence, and for the other one, we need perspective and moving away from the moment of total, mindfulness and presence. So this is very interesting balance to explore also in different contexts. Are we more focused on the moment? It could be also in terms of how we make decisions or anything else, but also in terms of well-being. Or are we more focused on a bigger picture? And how do these two connect? Do they connect enough? So as I mentioned, the implications for training with PERMA could really be to explore different models similar to PERMA. PERMA is most well-known one, but there are also others, models of well-being. and use them sometimes as a structure for a bit more holistic, let's say, approach in some things. And the other aspect could be also just to look into well-being, to maybe read a little bit about positive psychology and what are some of the main aspects of it. I'll also share a bit of reading on that. And then notice when working with someone, being it again with a team, organization, or an individual, what is the aspect that might be missing? Which is the one they're not, you know, which is the thin one for them, which is the one they're not really mentioning. Maybe it's a blind spot. But for you to notice their blind spot, you need to be aware of what are the aspects, what are the elements. Simple way of looking into elements is sperma. A little bit more complex is to dig in a little bit deeper, maybe. And the last one is really just this mindset to invite clients or participants to think of their own definition, to think a little bit more, to try to define things a bit more, you know, because one of the value of positive psychology is that it gives us vocabulary and definitions for things that are really hard to define. But I think it's even better if we spend more time defining them for ourselves in a way. And then maybe check with some common definitions and add on to ours. So if you want to look more into the aspects of well-being, I would invite you to check also on Happiness Academy, the 12 Pillars framework, if you don't know it yet. It's on Happiness Academy site. I'll send you the link also, and it's going to be in slides. And yeah, dig in a little bit. Think what are different fields or areas that might be interesting for you. And there are a lot of links there also on different literature and reading and so on. Not to dive deeper into that. So now from this very broad topic of well-being and positive psychology, we're going to go very directly and specifically into one quite more narrow topic, positive emotions. Positive emotions are a very interesting field within positive psychology because of two things. One is, by looking into them, there was a little bit of this insight that there are many more than we usually think of. No? And then the second one that is interesting was kind of positive psychology trying to answer a question: what's the use of positive emotion? What are they for? How are they impacting us? And how can we use them for, like, in a meaningful way? So that's two questions I'll be running through kind of quickly now. One of them is just the idea of, when we talk about positive emotions, what are the specific emotions we can keep in mind? And then the second one, talking a little bit more about how can we leverage those also in training, and which would be, yeah, useful way of doing that. So within positive emotions, there are usually, when you ask someone about positive emotion, or, you know, what are they feeling when they feel happy or whatever, they'll usually go with kind of relating it to joy, and sometimes often to amusement maybe as well. Maybe some of them will go more into the direction of love. I think these three are most commonly mentioned when we talk about positive emotions. However, when we look into positive psychology, we find that there are actually many more positive emotions that impact us in a really positive way, that usually don't get so much attention from us. We are not so aware of them. We don't praise them so much. We don't maybe even consciously enjoy them so much. And one of them is serenity. So just this sense of calmness and, you know, zen in a way. This is a really, really valuable emotion in many ways, and often neglected, you know, in fast world. And then gratitude as one of the really, really strongly correlated with happiness. And then we also have emotion of awe. So this wow, when we see a beautiful view or a piece of art or a great skill. So this sense of admiration. Then there is emotion of hope, emotion of trust, which is a lot, but it's also an emotion. Am I in a situation with sense of trust, or am I living life with often feeling trustworthy or trusting into others? And then the emotion of pride, one that often is bad-mouthed, if that's an English word, so hold as something that's potentially dangerous and could be negative and could lead to arrogance and so on. But pride is, in essence, is very, very positive emotion. Emotion, the purpose of which is to share our learnings with others. So when I do something well, I'm proud, and because of that, I share it with others and release that learning further into my tribe in a way. And also obviously grow my confidence. That's another positive aspect, but big one is really this learning aspect. And then inspiration and interest. These are some of the very interesting interests. You could relate to curiosity, depends how you want to call it. So within the hood of positive emotions, there are many more than these, but these are the one with which positive psychology is usually most often working and dealing and looking into, and there is a ton of research behind these specifically. Okay, so I see a question which is really interesting. Can you consider any emotion positive depending on the context? Like if you feel anxious or stressed, it also has positive side. Yes, and that's something where we have a little bit this unfortunate vocabulary, unfortunately, that we call positive emotions, the ones experience of which is pleasant. So that's the vocabulary behind positive emotions, negative emotions. We agree, though, on the side of positive psychology, that negative emotions are positive in their essence, in sense that they always have a purpose, that they're there for a reason, that they give us some meaningful message, maybe message we should change something, or we should fight something, or we should, I don't know, take time to regroup after a difficult event or anything like that. So yeah, I would agree. You could say not even any emotion is positive. I'd say even most of them in some way you could stretch that they have a positive purpose behind. There are some meaningful signs and indicators. But in this context today, whenever I say a positive emotion or negative emotion, we are talking about the quality of experience. Am I enjoying that emotion? Is it a pleasant one or not? And that's where we are differentiating them. Although many people agree that's not the most fortunate naming for that. So it would be, you could call them pleasant emotions instead. But this is the official vocabulary, so I didn't want to rename it. Thanks for the question, though. Do shoot more if some come up. So one of the most interesting findings in positive psychology in relation to positive emotions that happened is this theory that came as a result of a question, so why do we have positive emotions? And it came from Barbara Fredrickson, one of the biggest research names inside of emotions, who really came with this idea kind of saying, hey, we know why we have negative emotions, you know, we know we are angry, so we would fight for something. We know we are sad, so we would have time to connect with others and regroup and regather our energy. We know we have discussed not to eat something poisonous and so on. But what about positives? Why do we have them? And not to go into the whole story of how her theory developed, she came up with two conclusions based on years and years of research and connecting different bits, which she called broaden and build theory. And in those conclusions, she said, positive emotions are really there for two purposes: to broaden our perception and to build our resources. So the idea is positive emotions gives us more, or pleasant emotions, gives us more broad perception, and in some way they enrich us and they build our resources. So specifically, by broaden the way by broaden part, she meant broaden the way we think. They make us more open-minded. They make us more accepting to new experiences. You could say more curious, even though that is already an emotion as well. But also more creative, more capable of seeing bigger picture, context, patterns, connections, and less focus on details, which can be good or bad, depends on the context, but often is good in learning and in our context. So that mindset of positive emotion is really about openness, creativity, big picture patterns. And then the second part is really that they're made to build different resources, such as optimism, because they give us feeling everything will be good because it's good now. Social resources, health and physical resources, many different aspects. At the same time, they're related a lot to our physiology, in a way that are transforming our bodies in a positive way to bounce back from negatives. So basically they undo negative, harmful for our body effects of positive emotions, such as high blood pressure, constricted blood vessels, things like that. So they basically, in a way, build also our physical health and resources. There is a lot of connection between positive emotions and longevity, or do we say it like that, like long life, basically. Also positive emotions and health, positive emotions and immunity, also blood pressure and many other aspects related to physical health. So in general, we can say that they're good for physical health. Of course, it depends on context and everything. That's a bit of generalization maybe. So last maybe point important with positive emotions is that frequency of experiencing positive emotions, it's much more valuable towards our well-being than the intensity of emotions we are experiencing. And I think that's something we are maybe neglecting sometimes. Sometimes we think happiness is a lot about this high and very high enthusiasm and high emotion and energy. But in the end, it's much more related to often frequent moments of calm, hope, gratitude, serenity, curiosity, pride, all of these different things, not just to kind of joy and this high level, high energy emotions. So that's something I think that's very interesting also for us in terms of a training, that maybe the challenge there is a positive challenge to keep our participants in fairly positive emotion more frequently than intensely, if you know what I mean by that. Not to look for big moments to build, but much more to look for a flow of emotion we want to build within training somehow. So to wrap up positive emotions, some of the implications for us as trainers and coaches. It's mainly this idea that when we are in positive emotion, that means we are more open to new knowledge and ideas. We are more resourceful in some way. We are more open to comparing options, to noticing patterns, to exploring new options. We are more brave to some level and also more creative. And this is something we can very much apply in learning. So I think we all probably know that mild positive emotion is optimal for learning. High one is already distractive, but you do want people in mild positive emotion. But it is also really good for decision making, for problem solving, for innovation, creative thinking. So that is something we can leverage in activities we are doing, but it's also something where we can spread the word in terms of content to participants we are working with. That sometimes if they want to solve really difficult decision, it's not about the right tool, but it's also about putting yourself in the right emotional state to be able to see the opportunities. And that for me personally was a very big learning quite a while back, that decision making is, or problem solving is also a lot about tools, but it's even more about managing your emotional state first and then introducing the right tools. So maybe from positive emotions, that is the main implication we can take away. Now, a very short point to touch on. Evidence-based tools, that's the topic of our next webinar. That's why I decided not to go deep into it, but I just wanted to mention them here in case you're not joining the next one in March. And just throw in that, as I told you at the beginning, there is a lot of different interventions or tools designed from the side of positive psychology for positive psychology practitioners, so for people implementing it into different fields. And I wanted to outline here just briefly some of the main topics which are quite rich with toolboxes and interventions you can find under them, just to know what is available and what exists. So one of them is definitely mindfulness, very big pet of positive psychology and maybe the richest field in terms of tools. And that's one from which we can leverage tools for many, many training topics and many different purposes and goals. Another one is self-compassion. Beautiful website, selfcompassion.org, self-compassion.org. It has part with exercises as well. Really nice one for more for coaching topics though. In training, sometimes it's a little bit tricky topic. It has to be dealt with very safely, but that's the topic of accepting self, working on self-talk, working on image of self and the way we relate to ourselves. And that's also one field in positive psychology that's very so for coaches, it's one I would recommend to get to know if you're not aware of it. Then strengths, we'll touch on that one later a little bit more. One of the best places to look into tools for strengths is VIA. It's Institute on Character, they call it as well. I can send you the link in email later. I don't think I put it in slides. It's one of the best places because it's one of the first places that was looking into strengths, led by Seligman, and also one of the freest in terms that they have survey that's free, many materials that are free, and many things available. And then relationships is another topic for which in positive psychology we can find a ton of tools and ton of great models and exercises. And for that, one of the best names to follow would be Gottman's. It's a married couple who is married for like 60 years or something. So they're very good researchers, but also good at walking the talk. And they have great models, great toys, great tools, great books. And there are many more other researchers, but this is maybe the first name I would say. If you want to work with relationships, or if you're working with training on relationships, that's a really good place to check out. And then the last field that could be interesting to explore for us as trainers is positive education. It's one that's focused on mainly high school and elementary school education and transformation in education. Like how can we bring more mindfulness in education, more social and emotional skills, more well-being skills in education. However, as it's also about learning and all of that, it can be also a very interesting source of tools for us. So if any of these fields is interesting for you, just Google it and interventions and the keyword. And I think you will find a lot. If you don't find, feel free to email and I'll send a lot. But these are some maybe of the biggest fields rich in interventions and in tools. So implications for us as trainers from that is just that we have at our disposal a ton of really good, many of them free as well, tools to work with well-being, with performance, with resilience, with relationships that are very neglected tools from the side of trainers and coaches in practical field. So yeah, just tap into that and yeah, leverage them and use them. So officially we are halfway through in the number of points we're dealing with, but we have much shorter ones left. So we still have 3 topics to deal with: strengths-based approach, and then 2 very short ones: hedonic adaptation and dynamic spread of happiness. I know we are quite on top of the hour, so sorry for that. I'm a bit slow today, not my highest energy day. But let's still tap into this. If you need to drop off, if you have something else to do, feel free. The whole point of me talking so much is so that we can capture recording and send it over. So feel free to stay or to run away if you must. So strengths-based approach, the last bigger topic to tackle. It's this idea that we can work with individuals in their self-development and with teams and organizations in their self-development by leveraging strengths more than fixing the problems and the weaknesses. And to understand that approach, first we have to define to some level what strength is. And similar as with happiness and well-being, there are many definitions. This is one of the most reasonable one. That's why I decided to share that one. And it says, a strength is pre-existing capacity for a particular way of behaving, thinking, or feeling that is authentic and energizing to the user and enables optimal functioning, development, and performance. This is a definition by Alex Linley. He's one of the best names, let's say, to read, and he has good books on strengths-based approach. And it really goes into really the core of what strengths are. Strengths as seen from perspective of positive psychology are this capacity we have. So we can neglect it and then it's not great, or we can develop it. So it's kind of similar as to a talent, but talent that we actually are living and are using in our life. So something we're naturally good at, we have capacity for, but also something that needs to be developed and used for us to fulfill that potential and that capacity. And some of the most interesting things related to strengths are they feel really good when we use them. Like if you're naturally a very organized person, then organizing something will feel really good. Or if you're creative, then expressing your creativity will feel good. It will feel authentic and it will feel energizing. But at the same time, there is strong correlation that when we use our strengths more, also our performance is higher. In some way, maybe optimal is a little bit, optimal function is maybe a little bit optimistic version, but basically it will enable us to perform high and to achieve good results because it is something we are good at, and leveraging that is valuable. So if we think in terms of 3 key words for strengths, they would be authentic, enjoyable, and energizing. If I'm leveraging my strengths, I feel authentic, I feel energized, and I feel enjoyable. If I'm using something that I'm really good at, but I feel drained, that would mean that that's my developed skill that naturally is not my strength. Similar for authentic, yeah? So that's a little bit of differentiation there of what do we mean by strengths versus talents and so on. So from the side of positive psychology, we are looking into using our strengths through one really nice metaphor, which says that we are passing through life, and I know some of you heard this one from me before, that we're passing from life, through life in a way as a sailing boat. And that within us being a sailing boat, we have two choices of what we want to focus on. We can focus on the holes that the boat has, on different weaknesses and different leaks where the water is coming in and we're not really doing that well. Or we can choose to focus on sails, or that would be our strengths, sails that in which there is key to performance, but also fun, enjoyment, propelling us forward, and so on. And then the view of positive psychology is that obviously we cannot completely neglect the holes, because then we will sink and that will not be very useful. If we have a huge weakness, for example, if I cannot manage my time at all, obviously I need to deal with that. But then the view is also that with weaknesses, we shouldn't be perfectionists and focusing until we fix them all the way till the end, because that will mean we will spend all our time and energy fixing the holes, and we will have no capacity and energy and time to actually enjoy the sails. So we are really, from side of positive psychology, advocating the healthy balance. Fix the holes you must, but as much as you can, really focus on developing the skill of using your sails, because that's more enjoyable, that's also more authentic, it gives you more energy, and that's what propels you forward in terms of results and everything else. Takes you to new places in some way. To give that metaphor a little bit more scientific edge, there are a lot of research. This is very well researched area. And there are some interesting correlations related to strength. So I'll just a little bit briefly mention some of them if you're interested more in that kind of evidence-based side of it. So first of all, they're related to happiness. There is correlation between using your strengths more and feeling happier or feeling more, whatever, well-being, however you want to define it, well-being or fulfilled or anything else. The second one, interesting one, is it is related to confidence level. If we use them more, obviously, then we're doing things we're good at, and that's positive for our confidence. And it's also related to success. This one is maybe the weakest of the three links, but there is a certain link. And then the third one, that's very interesting, sometimes a bit controversial. We also consider that strengths and awareness of our own strengths is also a good compass or guidance towards finding the right environment and goals. Because if you remember that skills that we developed, but that are not our natural strengths, are draining us in terms of energy, then you will understand that spending most of our time in environment and on goals that are not related to our natural strengths will mean we are in constant struggle and constant in something difficult and constantly drain of energy, and not necessarily can leverage the same amount of energy and motivation as we would if we are in an environment that's more inclined to our strengths. That's not to say we should be looking only for environments which, pet our strengths and have a blind eye for our weaknesses. But it is to say that ideally we do want to strive to spend more time in environments such as careers, communities that nourish our strengths and where we can leverage our strengths. So that one is very interesting. Also in sense, if you're working with participants or clients in areas such as career development or choosing strength, a good topic conversation for that and something to bring in. So very shortly on what does that mean on the practical side for the trainer's side of you, what does that mean? How can we work with clients on discovering their strengths? There are different approaches. One of them is through different questions, reflecting on their past successes, reflecting on situations in which they felt like they're enjoying it and authentic and energized and so on. So a lot of self-reflection. Then also asking people from their environments, what would they say they're good at and what are their strengths? And then also through different structured assessments. I can send you a link also. I wrote really comprehensive articles on this on Trainer's Toolbox, comparing different assessments. When would you use which and why? And I would just want to say that when we work in discovering somebody's strengths, we ideally want to work with all of these three approaches. A little bit of self-reflection, a little bit of input from others, and a little bit of different kind of self-reflection through structured assessments, because that gives us most complete image in a way. So if you're working with someone who wants to tap into their strengths and discover and leverage their strengths or choose their career according to their strengths, it's better to touch on each of these briefly than to go just in one aspect very deep, because it's more balanced. So just as a tip for using it. And also we have different games we can leverage, such as strengths cards. I also wrote about Trainer's Toolbox about it. I'm also happy to share more if you're curious on my experience with them. That's something that's great to leverage for teams, because it's a playful way of sharing your strengths with others, so the rest of the team can help you leverage them more. And then it is also a great way of inviting team for appreciating the strengths of others. So you can have a peek on the Trainer's Toolbox on a blog, and then you can also ask if you want more, if you want to know more. I love these topics and games, so I'm happy to, to share more. So to wrap up, this strengths-based approach is a very big topic. I'm still thinking, should I throw in some of the tools such as cards and surveys in our webinar in March? So if you think that would be a good idea, let me know. Otherwise, who knows what will end up there, because there are too many choices. I wouldn't stay with it longer today because we are so over time already. But it is definitely one of the biggest and maybe most convenient field from positive psychology that we can use and leverage in coaching, and especially in more business context, comparing to these other topics. So some of the implications for the trainings, it's again 2 levels, one meta, one content. Meta in terms of, can I focus on strengths in my own training style? Can I discover my strengths more, leverage them more? And just can I pay attention to just use the strengths more in my training or coaching? And then also, can I as a trainer be focused to keep on noticing strengths in others more and encourage them to use them more? So that's more on the side if we're not even working with the topic of strength directly. That's just the way we can use it in a hidden as an extra secret tool. But then the second aspect is also supporting participants and clients, maybe more in the open, to leverage their strengths in different contexts. And this is hugely impactful topic for leadership, for teamwork, for own personal development. It's really one we can bring into so many training topics, especially with teamwork, well, with leadership as well, to look for focusing and finding strengths in others more. It's a really powerful way of boosting that. So that's one of the contexts we can use it in. So I'll close off the strengths here. We have just 2 more topics to touch on, and they're very brief. So I'm gonna attack them directly and finish off with that. So one of them is hedonic adaptation. Hedonic adaptation is a finding. I don't know if it's officially from positive psychology or psychology in general. Well, a bit of both, I would say. It's this finding that we people really suck at enjoying a good thing for a long time. And it's a reason why when you try a chocolate cake, first bite is amazing and second one is never as good, and they keep getting less good as you go. And the same thing is also the reason why when we buy a car, we love it for a moment and then 3 days later it's just our car, nothing new, and we need a new one and bigger and better. And with all our goals, and also sometimes sadly with our consumerism, it's also related to this part where we spike with something new And then very soon we take it for granted. If you look into relationships, you know, half of the relationships that fell apart will have the reason of falling apart because he was taking her for granted or she was taking him for granted. So hedonic adaptation is the danger of taking our blessings for granted, of taking good things in our life, in our relationship, in our career for granted. And it's very natural inclination of our brain to basically go back to its habitual place in a way. Looks a little bit like this if you want to visualize it. When something good happens, we totally spike, we love it, it lasts very short, we come back to our natural baseline of happiness. And the same for bad stuff. We hate it, it's terrible, very soon we come back to where we were before. So hedonic adaptation has a lot to do also with pleasure, why we enjoy pleasures not for very long, and why pleasures are not good, sustainable way of building happiness, because they fade out, we adapt too fast. But it's also related to all the other things related to happiness, getting used to things in some way. So I threw in a definition as well, just so we have it in slide. It's this tendency for us to come back to kind of stable level of happiness just because we get used to it. And it's in a way a good feature of our brain that we don't spend too many cycles on something that's already known and it's nothing new, but it is a stealer of our happiness, terrible, terrible stealer of our happiness. So with that one interesting implication for us in terms of training could be related really again to meta of training, thinking that if you want to create more memory, more attention, more stronger experiences, also emotion, that you need to keep on recreating that. I know probably everybody thinks in that direction already, but it's still worth underlining from another perspective. For hedonic adaptation, we need to keep recreating positive experiences. We cannot count that they will last because we spike them initially. And maybe even more important aspect, when working with others like participants and our clients in coaching, sometimes actually it's not the change that they need to achieve that are their goals. It's not their goals that is the change they need to achieve, but it is sometimes it's more related to their attitudes and more related to how much gratitude they have, how much mindfulness, how much savoring, in sense of enjoying the good things they already have. And sometimes, even if they need to create a change, it is really good place to first work on positive emotion, gratitude, savoring, building up positive energy, and then creating a change. It can be much more impactful and easier. So an aspect that's also related to hedonic adaptation, which we will not deal with today, is that because of this, really the only way of sustainably working on well-being and happiness is related to mindset and thinking patterns. Because of this, we cannot achieve well-being or happiness by fulfilling a goal, or we can for a short time, but it's not sustainable. So when we go back to how can we work with people for well-being, happiness, and so on, it always go back to working with thinking patterns in some different way, with gratitude, with mindfulness, with self-compassion, with just literally how are my thoughts working and why, but never, oh, let's fulfill this physical goal and then or this relationship, and then I'll be happy. I'm leaving hedonic adaptation, one of the worst traps of our happiness here, and touching the last point for today. And that one is related to something called dynamic spread of happiness. It's a very interesting research that showed, there is also a nice TED talk on it. So if you Google dynamic spread of happiness, TED talk, I think you should find it, or you can ask me or ask in Positive Psychology Tribe if somebody is there in Facebook group. So dynamic spread of happiness is a research that says if you have happy friends, thanks for staying longer, and bye, and no worries for leaving. If anybody else needs to leave, please feel free. Recording is always a safe net for that. So dynamic spread of happiness tells us that happiness is contagious in a way. If we have more happy friends, chances of our happiness are higher. And if we have more unhappy friends, they're lower. And it's literally, there are numbers attached to it, which I don't know by heart. But it's something, they are a new happy friend, happiness will spike 7%. And when you acquire a new, I don't know, unhappy friend, your happiness will go lower 5% or something like that. I don't know exact numbers. But the point of that one is that our happiness is very related to the happiness of our social circle. And by the way, it's same with gaining weight. If we gain weight, it's likely our friends will too, and the other way around. So the point of this one is just really simply how much when we change something, that change hugely impacts people around us, and the other way around. If we help people in our immediate environment change positively, like being in some way happier or whatever, that comes back as a ripple effect to us. So the quick implication of that in training is really, on one side, leveraging the power of relationships in training, understanding that positive emotion is contagious, that our emotional state hugely reflects on the group, that boosting emotion of the part of the group ripples to the other part of the group, and just using this contagious element of everything, happiness, positive emotion, energy level even, and just playing with that a little bit and see how we can leverage it. And then the second aspect is related to this, encouraging our participants or clients, maybe this is even more appropriate for clients, to take this into account and to build and leverage and prioritize the relationship that helps them in their learning or their goal. I know that's a little bit crude to say, focus on your good relationships or help friends also achieve goals. But this is really something that the power of community, of any relationship in achieving something, in training, in coaching included, is huge. And that's something that can be enough to share that fact with participants and encourage them to leverage it more. It can have a really big effect. That was our last point for today. And I would like to invite you now to think a little bit, just for a moment, what can we do with this? I threw at you 7 very different ideas from positive psychology, principles, or however you want to call it, with the idea that everybody should find something for yourself. So this is the moment when you're down to pick which are you taking away. I would invite you to just very shortly reflect which of these tools or ideas are valuable for you to leverage sometime soon. To just pick one that's most interesting and in some way explore it further or use it soon or try to focus on it a little bit more. Not a huge activity task, but really just trying to help you find clear focus in a mix of things that I threw at you. So I would invite you to think a little bit. Which of these would you take away? I'll put them on the screen again, because I know they were quite diverse and quite many. And I'll invite you to share in chat which of these would you take away or try out or do something about it. So in the first half, we had a little bit about positive psychology as such, and this idea of focusing on positive more because of negativity bias. Then we talked about definitions of well-being, including PERMA models, so positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievements or accomplishments. And then also about the balance between big picture and moment as different frameworks that we can leverage to work with well-being or with happiness of an individual or organization as well. Then we talked a little bit about using positive emotions to be more creative and to get more insights and ideas. We talked about different pools of evidence-based practices that we can tap into and explore further. And then we had the last 3 topics, basically saying leveraging strengths is really powerful and tapping into strengths for participants or for ourselves. And then one of our biggest dangers is hedonic adaptation. So we might want to always create different ways of novelty and working with mindset in gratitude, mindfulness, savoring to fight it. And then we also said happiness is hugely contagious. So we might want to leverage communities more, both within the training and out of the training room in a way. So I see a couple of ideas in the chat. I'll just read them quickly. Positive education and strengths. Okay, Gloria, remind me about positive education. I have a great book to recommend. No, positive emotions too. Okay, also PERMA. And then we had strengths-based approach. Definitely, yeah, that's really the most practical one we can take into most environments. It's a bit less fluffy than the well-being conversation and really powerful. And then we said, okay, PERMA model as well can be very useful for learning interventions, or also leverage more the impact of relationships on well-being. Cool. If you want to go more detailed into well-being, do have a look on 12 pillars as well. I actually created the framework of 12 pillars because PERMA for some clients and environments was too broad and a little bit too vague. That's why I'm using more 12 pillars, but I think PERMA is great for a bit higher level discussion. So it really depends. Hedonic adaptation, yes, scary thing, I know. And then strengths-based, yes, the part how you discover them and build upon them. Yeah, there is a lot, if you're interested in strengths, there is a lot of articles on Trainers Toolbox about it. Okay, then we have most of it. Well, thank you, happy to hear it was all kind of interesting. Yeah, I think this one was a little bit on the abstract side comparing to our next webinar. So comparing to the one on tools in March, I'm really happy to hear you find some links because I know it might have remained also a little bit vague because it was also a little bit high level, more on the principles of positive psychology and stuff like that. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna send you off a little bit also thinking where to go next and share other thoughts on where you can learn more. Then I'll get back to chat and check what else showed up there. And then we can also tackle any questions, especially if you want some more book recommendations, give me more specific topics. So from here, if you want to learn more about these topics, there are many places and I'm happy to recommend more and more specific. But two good starting points are related to Happiness Academy and Trainers Toolbox again. One of them is on Happiness Academy, the framework of 12 pillars of happiness. It's framework that covers more or less over all of these topics. And if you check out the framework, it takes you to many different links with other content and articles and stuff like that. So if you really want to look into positive psychology in general, not from trainers' shoes, go to Happiness Academy and check it there in 12 pillars area, or join the Happiness Academy newsletter. I'm also sending out, I'm also doing free webinars there. So maybe that's a good place to explore. I know some of you are there already. So, and the second one, something that I'll be doing after these webinars as well, is workshops, not free ones, and a little much smaller group and much more experiential and interactive. So I'll be doing this throughout April and May. I'll share the topics with you. The idea of workshops course of positive psychology tools workshops, sorry, is that they're open to join for either any of the topics that are interesting for you, regardless of if you want to join for everything or not. So the idea is that these modules in positive psychology for trainers and coaches workshop series, that they work as a course as well, and you're very welcome to join for the whole journey if you want to dig in really deep into these topics and get a lot of new tools. However, they're also very open to hop on an individual module and join for some of them if that's the area of your interest. So if you decide to dig in deeper, I would invite you to first go dig on Trainers Toolbox blog, dig on Happiness Academy, see what you find. But then if you also decide to dig into it a bit more experiential with practical tools, with conversations with other trainers, how can we leverage specific practical tools, do check out these as well and maybe join us for some of them. In each case, I'll see you, some of you, on the next webinar on, I think it's 10th of March, if I'm not mistaken, on tools. And that one will be nothing specific, no umbrella topic for tools, but very miscellaneous random tools that I throw in and that you can see what to take. Kind of similar like today, many topics together, not so connected, but really just a buffet, and you choose what is interesting for you, not so structured. Cool. So let me scan through the chat one more time. Hedonic adaptation was super interesting. Cool. I'm glad. Dynamic spread of happiness is interesting. Yes, very much. And strengths, self-compassion. Yes, self-compassion is a huge topic. I didn't focus on it much, but when I work with individuals, so more like coaching setting and so on, I think it's one of the most important topics, simply because if you lack that element for yourself, like self-compassion and good relationship with yourself, everything else goes through the window. So it's definitely a good topic to explore further. And then we have frequency versus intensity part. Yeah, that one was for me also a little bit of a wake-up call. But somehow when we imagine this, good emotional experience, we often think intensity, right? Okay, cool. So thank you for joining today. Sorry one more time for being terribly over time. I like to be time nerd. I'm not a fan of being over time. But yeah, I was just a bit indecisive of what to kick out. So if anybody has still any questions, I'll answer the one that's in chat now about self-compassion. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to shoot them in chat or speak up. I'll stop the recording here and then I'll be answering questions. Just a second to find it. Okay.